The crystal chandeliers of the Chen family mansion sparkled with festive lights, but for Victoria Chen, this Christmas Eve felt more like a nightmare than a celebration. Her father, real estate tycoon James Chen, had just dropped a bombshell that shattered her world into a million pieces. "You will marry David Wu," James announced, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone he used in his boardroom meetings. "The ceremony will be tomorrow, on Christmas Day." Victoria's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the mahogany dining table. David Wu, the maintenance worker who fixed their pool last summer? Her mind raced with confusion and disbelief. "Father, this is insane! I barely know him!" Victoria protested, her voice cracking. "He's a pool cleaner." James Chen's expression remained unchanged, his steel-grey eyes fixed on his daughter. "He's more than that, Victoria. He's the man who will teach you the value of hard work and humility, something I've clearly failed to instill in you." The grand dining room, decorated with expensive Christmas ornaments and golden tinsel, suddenly felt suffocating. Victoria looked around, desperately, seeking support from her mother, but Sarah Chen kept her eyes downcast, her fingers nervously twisting the pearl necklace James had given her decades ago. "This isn't the 18th century." Victoria stood up, her chair scraping against the marble floor. "You can't force me to marry someone." "I can, and I will," James replied calmly, taking a sip of his aged whiskey. "Unless you want to be cut off completely. No money, no car, no credit cards, no trust fund. You'll have nothing but the clothes on your back." Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. At 25, she had never known a life without luxury. Her father's threat wasn't empty. She had seen him do worse to business rivals who crossed him. "Why?" she whispered, tears threatening to spill. "Why would you do this to me?" James set down his glass and leaned forward. "Because you've become exactly what I feared. Entitled, spoiled, disconnected from reality. Last week, I watched you berate a waitress over a minor mistake until she cried. The month before that, you spent $500,000 on a shopping spree without a second thought. You're losing your humanity, Victoria, and I won't stand by and watch my only daughter become a monster." The words hit Victoria like physical blows. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but memories of her recent behavior flashed through her mind, each one making her wince. "David Wu is a good man," James continued, his voice softening slightly. "He works hard, treats people with respect, and understands the value of every dollar he earns. He's exactly what you need in your life." Victoria's mind raced to her few encounters with David. Yes, he had always been polite, even when she had been dismissive. She remembered how he had once stopped his work to help an elderly gardener who had fallen, not caring that his break time was being used up. "But he's poor," Victoria said weakly, immediately regretting her words as they left her mouth. James's expression hardened again. "That's exactly why you need this. You'll live with David in his apartment, work a regular job, and learn what real life is like for most people. If after 1 year you still want out, I'll restore your inheritance and you can divorce him." Victoria's world spun. An apartment, a job. She had never even done her own laundry. And David, what did he think about all this? As if reading her thoughts, James added, "David has already agreed to the arrangement. He knows the terms, including the possible divorce after a year. He's a practical man who sees an opportunity to help someone grow." The grandfather clock in the corner struck 9, its chimes echoing through the tense silence. Tomorrow was Christmas, a day that had always meant expensive gifts and lavish celebrations. Instead, it would now mark the beginning of a life she had never imagined for herself. "You have until midnight to decide," James said, standing up. "Either you marry David tomorrow and learn what real life is about, or you leave this house with nothing but your conscience to keep you company." As her father left the dining room, Victoria collapsed back into her chair, her mind reeling. The Christmas tree in the corner, decorated with ornaments worth more than what David probably made in a month, seemed to mock her predicament. She had less than 3 hours to make a decision that would change her life forever. The weight of her father's ultimatum pressed down on her like a physical force, making it hard to breathe. Yet somewhere in the depths of her panic, a tiny voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, her father wasn't entirely wrong about who she had become. The Christmas morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Patrick's Cathedral, casting kaleidoscope patterns across Victoria Chen's white designer wedding dress. She stood in a small side room, staring at her reflection in a full-length mirror, hardly recognizing the pale, anxious woman who looked back at her. After a sleepless night of tears and internal battles, she had chosen this path over destitution. But now, as the reality of her situation sank in, she wondered if poverty might have been the easier choice. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in!" she called out, expecting her mother or one of the few friends who had been hastily invited to this bizarre Christmas wedding. Instead, David Wu stepped in, wearing a simple but well-fitted black suit. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. She'd always viewed him as just the maintenance guy, but now, seeing him dressed formally, she noticed things she had overlooked before. He carried himself with quiet confidence, and his eyes held a warmth that seemed to reach out to her. "I know it's bad luck to see the bride before the wedding," he said with a slight smile, "but I thought we should talk before we do this." Victoria turned away, unable to meet his gaze. "What's there to talk about? You're getting paid to marry me, aren't you? That's why you agreed to this absurd arrangement." David's reflection in the mirror showed a flash of hurt cross his face. "Your father didn't offer me any money, Victoria. He told me about his concerns for you, and I agreed, because I've seen what he's talking about. I've watched you struggle with empathy and understanding for others, but I've also seen moments of kindness in you that you try to hide." She spun around to face him. "You don't know anything about me." "I know more than you think," he said quietly. "I know that you secretly feed the stray cats behind the mansion when you think no one is watching. I know you once left an envelope full of cash in old Mrs. Rodriguez's mailbox when you overheard her talking about not being able to afford her medication. You try so hard to maintain this image of a cold, spoiled princess, but there's more to you than that." Victoria felt exposed, vulnerable. Those were private moments she thought no one had witnessed. "So what? You think you can fix me? Turn me into some perfect, humble person?" David stepped closer, his expression serious. "I don't want to fix you, Victoria. I want to help you find the person you could be when you're not trying to live up to your father's empire or your mother's social expectations. The real you." Before Victoria could respond, her father's voice boomed from the doorway. "It's time." The ceremony passed in a blur of traditional hymns and Christmas decorations that seemed jarringly festive given the circumstances. Victoria barely heard the priest's words, too caught up in the surreal nature of her situation. When David slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, so different from the flashy jewelry she was used to, its weight felt like a shackle. After the ceremony, there was no lavish reception, no elaborate celebration. Instead, David helped Victoria load a single suitcase into his modest Toyota Corolla. Her father had been serious about the no-luxury rule. As they drove away from the cathedral, leaving behind the world she had always known, Victoria watched her father's Rolls-Royce disappear in the side mirror. The city streets were nearly empty, with most people celebrating Christmas in their homes. The contrast between the holiday's warmth and her current situation wasn't lost on her. "We'll stop by your father's house to pick up any personal items you want to bring," David said, breaking the tense silence. "Then we'll head to my place, our place now, I guess." Victoria clutched her designer handbag, one of the few expensive items she had been allowed to keep. "Where exactly do you live?" "Queensbridge," David replied. "It's not what you're used to, but it's clean and safe. I have good neighbors." Victoria's stomach churned. Queensbridge was a working-class neighborhood she had only seen from the window of her father's car. The thought of living there made everything feel terrifyingly real. When they arrived at David's apartment building, Victoria stood frozen on the sidewalk, staring up at the 6-story walk-up. Christmas lights hung haphazardly from some windows, and children's laughter echoed from somewhere inside. "Fourth floor," David said gently, picking up her suitcase. "The elevator's been broken for a month." As they climbed the stairs, Victoria's designer heels clicking against the worn steps, reality began to set in. This wasn't some elaborate Christmas prank or nightmare she would wake up from. This was her new life. David's apartment, their apartment now, was small but surprisingly well kept. A tiny Christmas tree sat in the corner, decorated with simple ornaments. The furniture was basic but clean, and the walls were painted a warm beige. It was nothing like the mansion she had grown up in, but there was something about it that felt lived in, real. "The bedroom's yours," David said, setting down her suitcase. "I'll take the couch." Victoria blinked in surprise. "But we're married now." "Technically," David's expression softened. "This marriage may be real on paper, but we both know it's not a love match. You're here because your father gave you no choice, and I'm here because I believe people deserve a chance to grow. We'll take things one day at a time." As evening fell on that strange Christmas day, Victoria sat on the bed in what was now her room, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the building. Children playing with new toys, families celebrating, lives being lived in close proximity. The wall heater clanked and rattled, so different from the silent central heating she was used to. From the living room came the soft sounds of David preparing dinner, the smell of cooking food, not prepared by servants but by her new husband, wafted under the door. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten all day. "Dinner's ready," David called out. "It's nothing fancy, just some homemade dumplings. Christmas tradition in my family." Victoria opened the door, ready to make some cutting remark about the modest meal, but the sight that greeted her made the words die in her throat. The small dining table was set with care, a single candle burning between two plates. David stood there, still in his wedding suit, but with the tie loosened, looking at her with a mixture of hope and apprehension. And somehow, that simple scene, the candle, the dumplings, the man who had agreed to this crazy arrangement, made Victoria realize that this year, Christmas had given her something she had never expected, a chance to discover who she really was, beyond the wealth and privilege she had always hidden behind. 3 months into their arranged marriage, Victoria stood behind the counter at Joe's coffee shop, struggling to keep up with the morning rush. Her once manicured hands were now calloused from carrying hot coffee pots, and her designer clothes had been replaced by a simple uniform with a name tag that read, "Vicky." 2 large lattes, one with soy milk and a blueberry muffin, she called out, trying to sound cheerful despite her exhaustion. This was her first job ever, a condition of her father's arrangement, arranged through David's connections. "Vicky," a familiar voice made her freeze. Looking up, she found herself face to face with Miranda Thompson, one of her former socialite friends. Miranda's perfect eyebrows shot up in surprise as she took in Victoria's appearance. "Oh my God, it's true!" Miranda gasped, pulling out her phone. "The rumors about you working in a coffee shop. Wait until everyone sees this." Victoria felt her face burn with humiliation. "Miranda, please don't—" "Too late!" Miranda smirked, showing her the photo she'd just posted. Victoria Chen, coffee shop girl, how the mighty have fallen. As Miranda sashayed out of the shop, Victoria fled to the back room, fighting back tears. She found herself facing the concerned eyes of her co-worker, Maria, a single mother who had been training her. "Don't let them get to you, honey," Maria said softly. "You're doing honest work. There's no shame in that." Victoria wiped her eyes, smearing her mascara. "You don't understand. I used to be like her. I probably would have done the same thing 6 months ago, but you're not that person anymore. Are you?" Maria's words hit home, making Victoria pause. That evening, walking home from her shift, Victoria reflected on how much her life had changed. The 3 blocks to the apartment that had once seemed like an endless journey now felt natural. She even knew some of the local shopkeepers by name, something she would have considered beneath her before. Entering the apartment, she found David at the kitchen table, surrounded by paperwork. He looked up with concern when he saw her red eyes. "Rough day?" he asked, pushing aside his work. Victoria dropped onto the couch, kicking off her shoes. Miranda Thompson came to the coffee shop. She took pictures. "By now, everyone in my old circle knows exactly how far I've fallen." David sat beside her, maintaining the respectful distance he always kept. Over the past months, they had developed a comfortable routine, living more like roommates than a married couple. But sometimes, in quiet moments like this, Victoria found herself noticing things about him, the kindness in his eyes, the gentle way he spoke, how he never made her feel inadequate despite her struggles with basic life skills. "You haven't fallen, Victoria," he said quietly. "If anything, you're rising above who you used to be." She turned to look at him. "Really look at him. How can you say that? I can barely make a decent cup of coffee. I still haven't figured out how to use the laundromat without ruining something. And today I cried because someone took my picture in an apron. 3 months ago, you wouldn't have cared about making a good cup of coffee for anyone. You wouldn't have apologized to Maria when you were late for your shift last week. You wouldn't have spent your tip money buying soup for Mr. Garcia when he was sick." Victoria felt her chest tighten. She hadn't realized David had noticed these small changes in her. Their moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Opening it, they found Tony, their elderly neighbor, looking distressed. "David, Victoria, I hate to bother you, but the building's heating is out again. My granddaughter Sarah is coming down with something and it's getting cold." Without hesitation, Victoria spoke up. "Bring Sarah here. We have that space heater David fixed last week." David looked at her with surprise and something else. Pride? As they set up a makeshift bed on their couch for a feverish 7-year-old, Victoria caught her reflection in the window. She was wearing worn jeans and a simple sweater, her hair in a messy bun, helping a neighbor she wouldn't have even acknowledged months ago. The strange thing was, she felt more genuine in this moment than she ever had at her father's mansion. Later that night, after Sarah's fever had broken and Tony had taken her home with tears of gratitude, Victoria sat at the kitchen table with David. "Why did you really agree to this arrangement?" she asked suddenly. The truth this time. David was quiet for a long moment, organizing his thoughts. "I grew up in this neighborhood. I've watched people like your father build luxury condos and push out families who've lived here for generations. But when I worked at your house, I saw something in you. Moments of real kindness when you thought no one was watching. I thought maybe if you could see life from this side, you'd become someone who could make a difference." Victoria felt tears forming again, but these were different from her earlier ones. "I was horrible to you when you worked for us. I barely acknowledged your existence." "You were," he agreed with a small smile. "But you're not that person anymore." Their eyes met across the table, and for the first time, Victoria felt something shift between them. The artificial nature of their marriage suddenly felt less important than the real connection they had built over these months. The moment was broken by Victoria's phone buzzing. Another message from her old life. Opening it, she found herself looking at Miranda's photo, now viral among her former social circle. The comments were cruel, mocking her fall from grace, but as she looked at the picture, at herself in her work uniform, focusing on getting an order right, she felt something unexpected. Pride. She was learning, growing, becoming someone new. "They think they're shaming me," she said, showing David the phone. "But look at that picture. I'm actually working, contributing. When did any of them ever do that?" David's smile widened. "Now that sounds like the Victoria I knew you could be." Just then, Victoria's phone rang. It was her father. She hadn't spoken to him since the wedding, and her hand trembled as she answered. "Victoria," Chen's voice was clipped. "I've seen the pictures circulating online. If you've had enough of this lesson, you can come home now. I'll restore your accounts, and we can put this unfortunate experiment behind us." Victoria looked at David, who was pretending not to listen while cleaning up Sarah's medicine bottles from the coffee table. She thought about the past 3 months, The struggles, the tears, but also the genuine connection she'd made, the sense of accomplishment she felt after each shift, and the way David had believed in her even when she hadn't believed in herself. Her father was offering her old life back, all the luxury and ease she had once thought she couldn't live without. But sitting there in that small apartment, watching David care for their neighbors, remembering the genuine smile Maria had given her that morning, Victoria realized something profound. She wasn't sure she wanted that old life anymore. "Dad, I need time to think about it," Victoria said into the phone, her voice steadier than she expected. The silence on the other end was deafening. "Time." James Chen's voice hardened. "I've given you 3 months of time, Victoria. I thought you would have learned your lesson by now." "That's just it, Dad," she replied, watching David disappear into the kitchen to give her privacy. "I am learning, just not the lesson you expected." After ending the call, Victoria sat in silence, her mind racing. Her father's offer had awakened something unexpected, not relief at the possibility of escape, but fear of losing what she had found here. The next morning at the coffee shop, Victoria was surprised to see David waiting in line. He never came to her workplace, respecting her space to grow independently. But there he was, looking troubled. When he reached the counter, his expression was grave. "Your father came to see me at work today." Victoria's heart stopped. "What? What did he want?" "Not here," David said quietly. "Can we talk after your shift?" The remaining hours crawled by, each minute feeling like an eternity. When Victoria finally finished work, she found David waiting outside. They walked to a small park nearby, the spring air carrying the scent of blooming cherry blossoms. "Your father offered me $5 million to divorce you," David said without preamble, sitting on a bench. Victoria felt the world tilt on its axis. "What?" "He said he's realized his experiment was a mistake. He thinks I'm holding you back from your real potential." David's voice was calm, but his hands were clenched. "He had the check with him. All I had to do was sign the divorce papers." Victoria's throat went dry. "What did you say?" "I told him I needed to think about it." David turned to look at her, his eyes intense. "Victoria, I know our marriage started as an arrangement, but these past months, I've watched you grow into an amazing person. You're strong, compassionate, real, and He trailed off, standing up and pacing in front of the bench. "But maybe your father is right. Maybe I am holding you back. You could do so much more with your life than serve coffee and live in a cramped apartment." Victoria stood up, anger flaring. "Is that what you think I want? To go back to being that shallow, spoiled person?" "Of course not," David replied, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "But with your father's resources, you could help people on a much larger scale. $5 million could do a lot of good in this neighborhood." Victoria stepped closer to him. "Is that why you're considering it, to help the neighborhood?" "Partly," he admitted, "but also because I care about you too much to be the reason you give up opportunities." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Victoria felt her heart racing as she realized something. She cared about him too. Somewhere between the late-night conversations, the shared meals, and the quiet moments of support, she had fallen in love with her arranged husband. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Maria at the coffee shop. "Turn on the news now." Pulling out her phone, Victoria found a local news live stream. Her father was holding a press conference outside Chen Enterprises. "And so, as of today, we are beginning development on the Queensbridge Revival Project," James Chen was saying. "The old buildings will be demolished to make way for luxury condominiums and high-end retail spaces." Victoria felt her blood run cold. Queensbridge, their neighborhood. The building where they lived, where Tony and Sarah lived, where Maria lived. The current residents will be offered fair market value for their properties, James continued, his corporate smile never wavering. "This development will bring new life to a struggling neighborhood." David's face had gone pale. "He's going to destroy the entire community." "No," Victoria whispered. "This is my fault. He's doing this because of me." The reality crashed down on her. Her father wasn't just trying to buy David off. He was systematically destroying everything and everyone that had become important to her, forcing her back into his world. "We have to stop him," Victoria said, her voice growing stronger. "And I think I know how." She pulled out her phone again, this time dialing a number she hadn't used in months. "Rebecca, it's Victoria Chen. Remember how you always said you wanted to break into investigative journalism? I have a story for you. It's about my father, and it's going to change everything." David grabbed her wrist gently. "Victoria, wait. If you do this, there's no going back. You'll be cutting ties with your father forever." Victoria looked at him, seeing the concern in his eyes, the love he tried to hide, and the respect he had for her choices. Then she thought about Maria's children, about Tony and Sarah, about all the families who had welcomed her into their community. "I know exactly what I'm doing," she said, her voice firm. "For the first time in my life, I'm going to fight for something that matters." She turned back to her phone. "Rebecca, let me tell you about the real James Chen and what he's willing to do to control his daughter." As she began to speak, Victoria felt David's hand slip into hers, squeezing gently. She squeezed back, drawing strength from his presence. Whatever came next, they would face it together, not because of an arrangement or a contract, but because they chose to. The next morning, James Chen's carefully constructed world began to crumble. Rebecca's exposé hit the media like a tornado, revealing years of predatory real estate practices, displaced families, and corporate manipulation. But the story that captured the public's imagination was Victoria's transformation, the billionaire's daughter, who had chosen love and integrity over wealth and power. Victoria stood in Joe's coffee shop, watching the story unfold on the small TV mounted in the corner. Her hands trembled as she saw her father's empire beginning to crack. "Victoria," the familiar voice made her turn. James Chen stood in the doorway, looking older than she'd ever seen him. Gone was his usual confident stance, replaced by the weariness of a man watching his life's work dissolve. "You shouldn't be here, Dad," Victoria said quietly, conscious of the customers watching their exchange. "My own daughter," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The board is calling for my resignation. The media is destroying our family name." Victoria stepped out from behind the counter, facing her father directly. "No, Dad, you did this. Every family you pushed out of their homes, every life you destroyed for profit, those were your choices. I just finally had the courage to expose them." James moved closer, lowering his voice. "I gave you everything, the best schools, the finest clothes, every advantage in life, and this is how you repay me." "You gave me things, Dad," Victoria replied, feeling David's supportive presence as he appeared beside her. "But it was here, in this poor neighborhood, with these common people, that I learned what really matters. It was David who taught me the value of honest work and genuine connections." Her father's eyes darted between them, realization dawning. "You actually love him," he said, sounding bewildered. "This wasn't just about defying me. You really chose this life." "I did," Victoria confirmed. "And I choose it every day. These people you look down on, they've shown me more kindness and taught me more about life than all your money ever did." The shop had fallen silent, everyone watching the confrontation. Maria stood nearby, ready to support Victoria if needed. Tony and Sarah were there too, along with other neighbors who had become like family. James Chen looked around the coffee shop, really seeing it for the first time. The worn but clean tables, the regulars who came every day, the community bulletin board covered with local events, and helping hands offered freely. "I thought," he began, then stopped, collecting himself. "I thought I was teaching you a lesson about humility. Instead, you taught me one about humanity." Victoria felt tears forming, but held them back. "It's not too late, Dad. The Queensbridge project, you can still stop it. You can choose to be different." James was quiet for a long moment, the weight of the decision visible in his stance. Finally, he pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Thompson, cancel the Queensbridge development, all of it." He paused, listening. "Yes, I'm sure. and prepare a press conference for this afternoon. It's time for Chen Enterprises to take a new direction. The relief in the coffee shop was palpable. Victoria heard Sarah's excited squeal, Tony's deep sigh of relief, and the murmurs of joy from her neighbors. But she kept her eyes on her father, waiting. James put his phone away, looking tired but somehow lighter. "I don't approve of how you did this, Victoria, but I'm proud of who you've become." He turned to David, extending his hand. "Take care of my daughter, though it seems she's quite capable of taking care of herself now." David shook his hand firmly. "We take care of each other." As James Chen walked out of the coffee shop, Victoria felt David's arm slip around her waist. The simple gesture carried the weight of their journey, from arranged marriage to real love, from obligation to choice. 1 year later, on Christmas Day, Victoria and David stood in their apartment, now legally theirs, thanks to a reconciliation gift from her father. The same tiny Christmas tree stood in the corner, but this year it was surrounded by presents for their neighbors' children. "Ready for our first Christmas party?" David asked, straightening the star on top of the tree. Victoria looked around at their home, still modest by her old standards, but rich in all the ways that mattered. Through the window, she could see neighbors arriving, carrying dishes for the potluck dinner. Maria was coming with her famous tamales. Tony and Sarah were bringing their traditional Italian cookies, and even her father had promised to stop by, another step in their slowly healing relationship. "You know what's funny?" she said, turning to David. "A year ago, Dad thought he was punishing me by making me marry you. He thought living this life would teach me humility. Instead, David prompted, pulling her close. Instead, it taught me happiness." Victoria stretched up to kiss him, their wedding rings catching the light from the Christmas tree. Sometimes the best gifts come in unexpected packages. As their guests began to arrive, filling their small apartment with laughter and love, Victoria realized that her father's Christmas punishment had turned out to be the greatest gift of all. She had lost a fortune but gained a fortune's worth of love, integrity, and purpose. And as she watched David welcome their guests, his face glowing with genuine joy, she knew that some miracles don't involve magic or divine intervention. Sometimes they just require the courage to choose love over fear, community over status, and authenticity over appearances. This Christmas, Victoria Chen had everything she never knew she wanted, and she wouldn't change it for all the wealth in the world. What would you have done in Victoria's position? Would you have chosen love and personal growth over wealth and comfort? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective on this life-changing decision. And here's another question to think about. Do you believe James Chen, Victoria's father, truly changed in the end? Or was he just accepting the inevitable? Let us know your opinion. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support means everything to us. It's what keeps us going, allowing us to bring you powerful, emotional stories every single day. Look to your left. See that video? Trust me, you won't want to miss it. It's another incredible journey that will touch your heart just as deeply as this one did. The emotions, the transformation, the unexpected turns, they're all there waiting for you. Remember, every subscribe, every like, every comment helps us continue sharing these meaningful stories that remind us what truly matters in life. See you in the next one.